Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to this very special Sony Alpha live stream in partnership with Camera House. Those of you who've been tuning into some of our Sony Alpha live streams previously will be find this very familiar. My name is Sean Ellwood. I am going to be your host this evening, and I'm joined by two of our Sony Alpha ambassadors. Let me step out from behind the curtain here. Hello, good evening. We have Craig Parry and Mark Gaylor, two of our longest serving ambassadors, and definitely veterans of the A7R series, which is our subject for this evening. So it's going to be a great night. We're going to have a bit of a chat about their experiences using the A7R cameras. We're going to talk a little bit about the series, where it sits, what the other cameras in our range are, very quickly. I won't make it too long, promise. Be quick and painless. And then we're going to take a bunch of questions. And I really hope people will jump in and make with the questions. It's a great opportunity. You've got some of the biggest brains around these cameras on the stream. So if you got questions, if you got things that you'd love to know, of course, we'll volunteer some tips, but ultimately everyone's got different questions. Everyone's got different things they want to get out of their camera. And the best way to find out how to do it is to ask. So that's what we'll be trying to do this evening. But without further ado, let me welcome to the stream Mark Gaylor. Hello, sir. Good evening.
Good evening, and it's great to be online.
I think you've upgraded your setup since last time I saw you.
Yeah, I just moved apartments just at the beginning of lockdown, and so I just used the black background last time, and so now I've actually looked like I've moved in.
No, it's a very handsome display of Sony cameras and others I see in the background. Very
nice. There's a couple of Holgers in there.
I liked your Kodachrome Flex earlier.
Yeah,
just barely visible over the top of your head
there.
There
you go. Yeah.
Very nice, very nice. Next on the stream, we have Craig Parry from Linux Heads. How are you doing, mate?
Yeah, good, mate. It's a little bit exciting to be in the company of Mark and you, Sean, again.
It's such a pleasure. It's been a while.
It has. It's been a week and a half.
Well, that's virtually a week and a half, but in person, so long.
Oh, a long time, yeah.
Actually, I've misintroduced you there. You're actually in Byron Bay right now, aren't you?
I am.
Tuning in from Byron Bay.
Yeah, there's no way I'm going to have it at home because the kids will run into the room and hassle me. So.
Mine's still small enough to be restrained, but maybe you don't have that advantage anymore.
No, they're still small, but they can't be restrained though.
Very good, very good. All right, well, so yeah, look, as I said, we're going to sort of have a bit of a chat around that Alpha 7R series to begin with. I guess I was going to kick it off just with, a real 20,000 foot view of the range, just to put everyone in the picture. And also to get the real dry nerdy stuff out of the way early on. So let me just throw up my my presentation here. It's 2 slides, so it's not going to be too painful. So yeah, look, our full frame range in mirrorless, we have 4 series. The A7S series, all about sensitivity, low light video. The R series, which we're focusing on tonight, all about resolution, all about getting the most detail, the dynamic range. Every frame has to be perfect. The A9, all about speed of focus and of capture. Obviously that one is really aimed at your sports pros, your wildlife shooters. Although, wildlife shooters seem to really be torn between the R and the 9 series, just depending on whether they want that croppability. I'm sure Mark will give us plenty of examples there.
Yeah.
And then we have the A7 series, which is our all-rounder. So gives you, a good bit of speed. It's good sensitivity. It's good in low light, and of course, much more achievable in terms of price point. And it is a hobby where money can be an obstacle. So stepping on to the R series range, there are 3 R series cameras that you can still buy in Australia. The R Mark I is now discontinued. You might be able to get one secondhand, but the ones that we still put on a shelf, the R Mark II, around $3,099. Look, these prices, by the way, I just pulled them off the Camera House website. They might be different to what you see out on the street or at your local camera house store, but this is just a sort of a general guideline. So R Mark II, about 3099, R Mark III, 4399, and the R Mark IV, about 56. So what do you get at each of those price points? Resolution-wise, the R Mark II, the R Mark III, both pretty similar. Both very high resolution bodies, even by modern today's standards. But this R Mark IV definitely steps it up an extra notch there. Frames per second, again, you get that edge on the R Mark IV. The focus is something that really steps up as you go through the R series, and Mark will talk a little bit about this. I've seen during his presentation, but the Mark I's, we didn't have phase detect autofocus at all on the R series in the round ones, and that definitely was a pain point. The R Mark II is, for its generation, incredibly advanced, and so I often tell people it's kind of you would imagine that going from the Mark III bodies back to the Mark II, you're going to take this big hit to autofocus, but actually the R Mark II really performs remarkably well. It was one of our first cameras that had really good tracking eye autofocus. It was sort of underappreciated in its time, but definitely was a really, really great camera for autofocus. Definitely ahead of its time. R Mark III, you get better autofocus. You get a joystick for autofocus, which I always pull out just because I think it's such a quality of life feature. You get big improvements to autofocus, and you get lots of other improvements to quality of life things. And in the R Mark IV, you get 4th gen phase detect autofocus. This is released post A9. There's been a lot of advancements. It really is the best autofocus you can get in an R series camera. And of course you get that animal eye autofocus as well. So for focus, it's hard to beat. Battery wise, of course, the Mark III is such a big step up for battery life because you do get that Z series battery, more than double the battery life. W series batteries was always a pain point. Of course, you can just carry an extra. It's not a problem necessarily, but there is something nice about not having to carry spares most of the time. So Z series is definitely a big plus. The R Mark IV does improve slightly, but you are still running off that same battery. And then just to sort of pull a couple of points out to I guess maybe add that extra little thing on the end. The R Mark II, I just think it is smaller than the others. We sort of made them bigger over time, and I think a lot of people like that. People like the extra grip space. People like something a little bit more hefty. But if you really want a small camera with a big sensor, we don't really offer that in the latest series as much. They have gotten a little bit bigger. So if you want something that's super compact, this R Mark II kind of offers something unique there. And of course, look, using basically a similar sensor to the R Mark III, fundamentally, the image quality you get for the dollars is pretty hard to beat on the R Mark II. R Mark III, lots of quality of life stuff. You got the dual card slots, which, that thing's been beaten to death on the internet. But honestly, if you want that and you need that, then you can't not have it. For everything else, the ergonomics have been improved. The viewfinder's nicer. Just lots of little things on the R Mark III really got tightened up. And the R Mark IV, I think, the ergonomics on the whole, through the roof. Image quality, of course, in the end, it's the best that there is for full frame sensors, and there's something about just having the best, that has an appeal all of its own. And then you've also got, better in-outs to just sort of get data on and off the camera, which is great for people on the more professional end of things. So listen, that's my technical monologue. We're going to hand over now to the guys who actually use this gear a lot more than I do. So Craig, I think you're going to show us some shots that you've captured on R series cameras, and we can have a bit of a dig into that. Yeah. That'd be good. I started off with the A7R II. That was my first camera from Sony. And as soon as I used that camera, I was addicted to the resolution. I couldn't believe that a camera could produce so much resolution and be, and be so fast as well. So, when was that? 2016. So from there, it's really kicked off, and
I want to show you some images here on Photoshop. Now, I've selected a couple. This one here is from the A7R III. Now, this was taken last year here in Byron Bay. Now, this image, I used artificial light, so I used a strobe on the camera, and I just wanted to really accentuate the shell of the turtle. So I want to share what this is 42 megapixels. So if we zoom in, I'll take it slowly. Appreciate how close we're going to get on this one. A bit disorientating when you see so much detail through the image.
Wow.
It's like, for me to get that much detail, allows me to have my prints huge in the gallery here, and having my prints huge creates a lot of wow factor, and people feel like they're more connected to the photo if they can actually see all that detail. Now, last year when the A7R IV came out, I had the opportunity to take that to Africa, and I spent 2 weeks in Botswana with the 600 F4 and also the 200 S600. Now, I'll show you 3 images from that particular tour. Now, the first one here is of a lion looking straight at me. Now, I want to show you something pretty special. Now, if I zoom in on this image, this is shot on the 600 F4. If I zoom in, and using the animal eye function works so well on lions, so because they're very similar to the domestic cat. So if I zoom in, like, I cannot believe how much detail. And a lot of these images that I shot in Africa, I was able to actually see my own reflection in the car. So look at that drip of water just there. It's just mind-boggling. And this was pretty exciting for me to be able to shoot, 60 plus megapixels. I just couldn't believe, especially when I'm using a prime lens like the 600 mil. This here is an image. So we're looking now at an elephant's eyelash. So if I zoom out here, like the detail. This particular elephant probably came within 5 meters from our car. So having the opportunity to zoom in and capture the eyeball of the elephant was pretty special.
That's something else.
Yeah, I mean, look at the eyelashes. Just look like that's some sort of rough brush.
Yeah.
Forest.
Pretty rough brush.
But
hey, Craig, just to pause in this, we had a question from the chat I thought we might chuck up now.
Sure.
Peter Collins has asked, can you discuss the difference between the animal eye focus on the R3 compared to the R4? I think Mark's probably the person who might have the most direct experience, but I'll just sort of comment from a technical standpoint. So the animal autofocus got rolled back onto the R3 in firmware 3. And so obviously, in terms of the mode that you can select and the behavior of it, generally speaking, it should be identical. I think where you do get an advantage on the R Mark IV
side profile.
Yeah. Is that been your experience, Craig?
It has, yeah. I mean, I found also photographing animals that are moving in between trees and shrub and also long grass. I found the A7R IV to be much more sticky on the subject and a lot quicker too. It's I mean, yeah. I found the R4 seemed to be that software seemed to be very native to that particular camera.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, it's a big improvement.
I think one of the things that is always going to be true, regardless of what's done with firmware, is that the R Mark IV because it has that 10 frames per second shutter. The amount of time the sensor's blacked out for after a capture is shorter. You're able to get back to autofocusing faster, and so it's going to be a little bit more tenacious when you're trying to capture images, while you're focusing. And it's also, of course, got the the newer processor, which can make a difference for that sort of stuff. So, yeah, probably a lot of the same software running, but of course, the hardware under the hood is going to be different. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it was exciting to be able to take this camera to Africa, because that's, for a nature photographer using the animal eye focus, that's the pinnacle of photography for nature with animals. So, yeah, I really enjoyed it, and it made my job a lot easier. Just being able, especially when you're using, the 600 f4, or say I was using the 135, f1.8. These lenses that have really shallow depth of field, your eyes are the most important thing that you need to get when you're getting portraited animals. So it made my job a lot easier, and I was more successful, I would say, over that period of time, because of the animal eye focus.
Yeah, brilliant. All right, thanks for the detail.
Yeah, no, that's fine. And so this image here is another prime example of the detail that I was getting out of the A7R4. This is a water buffalo, and these birds here actually clean the animal. Just look at this detail. I was blown away. You can almost see every feather, or you can't see every feather. And
wow.
But look, it's just, yeah. I mean, with the right amount of light, and and also having a high shutter speed, especially when you're using the 600 f4, you need to be really pushing your shutter speed above 1500 for the second, or you need to. I mean, to tell you the truth, in this image here, I was on a boat, and we had gimbals, so we're able to put the tripod, have it like a mechanical gimbal on the boat, so it made my job a lot easier. But it's really nice to also have the luxury of putting your shutter speed up and having those sort of apertures of f4 to be able to create higher speeds, and also have that nice bokeh in the background there. So yeah, I think I'm addicted to resolution. I mean, if we get off Photoshop now and look behind me, I do a lot of bigger prints.
Oh, Craig, you've just shared that one application, so it's
okay,
not going to work if you minimize it.
No worries.
If you want to switch it over, we can.
Yeah. So if we can go back to my face.
Yep. Here we go.
There we go.
Look at that beautiful man.
So thank you, mate. So if you look behind me here, this image in particular this is what I call follow. It was captured in Byron Bay, and it's one of my favourite images that I've captured on the R series, or one of my favourites. Now this is about 2 meters wide. I've been having the luxury of being able to print such large files has become quite addictive for me, and having the A7R4, I haven't actually printed any of my A7R4 images that big, but I'm really looking forward to doing it. It's kind of amazing to be able to stand up to a 2 meter wide print and just see all that detail, only a foot away from the particular image. So yeah, so there we go.
Right.
Yeah.
I nearly lost you, Craig.
That's all right.
I want to apologise to everyone at home. We're all back now.
Yeah, so I mean, it does get you start pixel peeping, and you start looking at things a little bit closer and having that luxury, and yeah, I'm enjoying the system.
I was going to say on the on the bird on the buffalo image that you were showing earlier, normally that would be the kind of image where you would expect to see, really severe aliasing on a camera with no AA filter, but there's almost none, which I thought was really good to see. Yeah, it's always sort of been the bugbear. You have like lots of those fine lines with lots of contrast, and you'd see a lot of color aliasing.
Magenta, and
but it comes up beautiful.
Yeah, it's a good luxury. So But I've got. I'm pretty simple with my camera equipment. Like I try not to take too much away with me because I don't want to complicate things in my own brain. I think if I take too many lenses with me, then I start getting stressed out and I'm like, oh my god, what do I use? So behind me here, I've got my core lens group that I'm using currently. I always travel. I mean, any professional needs to travel with more than one body. It's very important. You can make mistakes and drop a body. I've done that numerous times. I'm pretty clumsy, so I'm always traveling with two cameras. There's nothing worse than being in a remote location and not having a spare body. So this is the A7R4, and I've got the 135 1.8, and that's been a fantastic portrait lens. I've been using that a lot. Even in the water, I've been shooting across the water as well as shooting portraits. So then the 24 to 70 2.8 is my go-to lens. This one here had a lot of wear and tear, and it's definitely my lens that's attached to my body most of the time. And now underwater, I'm either using the 16 to 35 f2.8, which has been absolutely incredible, and also the 12 to 24. So I've been doing a lot of my wide angle under and over shots with this particular lens. So much flexibility, being able to zoom in and out from 12 to 24 mil. So I've got the luxury of 12 mil, having those really epic wide shots, or then going into 24 and getting those beautiful portraits. And then for my sort of nature and whether I'm doing surf photography or shots in Africa, or I'm using the 200 to 600 mil. It's extremely versatile lens. Like I don't have to move my body to get the shot. I can just zoom in and out, and being able to zoom this lens with it's such a quick turn. 200, 600. Like it's so simple, and it's quite compact. Once you take the lens hood backwards and the body off, I can fit it in my low pro bag there, which is only it's a whistler, and it's quite small and compact and easy to travel with. So yeah, that's my lens setup. Simple, 2 bodies, 5 lenses, done.
Yeah, that's great. All right. Well, I think we had one other question I wanted to quickly throw up here. Mark Faust is asking, is stabilization improved on the R Mark IV over the R3? He seems to be doing a better job on the 200-600. I sort of asked that of you particularly, Mark. Any thoughts on that one?
Look, it's a very personal thing. How slow can you go? It's I grew up using Kodachrome 64 ISO, so I did actually learn how to handhold cameras very slow, even prior to stabilization. But it has certainly been getting better. I'm typically holding 1/5 of a second now. It may be possible to go even slower. When I do that, I always take 2 or 3 images just in case. It's all about breath control, stance, looking for somewhere to put your elbows. But certainly it's a great feature. I personally couldn't live without it because I hate tripods so much. I do have to hand hold in very low ambient light. I'm typically photographing before sunrise or after sunset.
Yeah, right. Craig, have you had what's your experience been moving from the 3 to the 4 in terms of stabilization?
Yeah, I mean, I've always tried to get the image correct. I mean, it's beautiful to have, and I love using it, especially for video. But I always, especially when I'm shooting such long lengths, I tend to really pump my shutter speed right up there. This morning I was shooting sunrise, and I wanted to really focus on the waves, and I had my 200 to 600 on a tripod, and I was using the app from Sony to activate the camera, and that was really handy because being able to not have that shake when you push the button, even having the timer on when you push the button, still with that sort of focal length of 600, you can have that slight wobble after the 5 seconds finishes. But Yeah, definitely. It's been incredible, but I tend to always, when I'm shooting those sort of long telephoto lenses, I'm always about over a thousandth of a second because I really want to make my images super sharp, and I don't want to rely too much on technology. I want to try and get the shutter speed working, especially if I'm shooting a subject that's moving. You know, if animals moving or whatever, you need to have that shutter speed up there.
Right. Yeah. No amount of stabilization is going to
Yeah.
remove
Stop.
subject motion.
I think probably why I haven't noticed a huge difference is because as you increase resolution, you often need to increase the shutter speed a little bit more. So I think I'm hand holding the low ambient light landscapes at about the same shutter speed, but obviously the resolution has gone up by a third. So I suspect that's what's happened is they have improved the steady shot, but I haven't really started using any slower shutter speeds.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. All right, Mark. Look, I think it might be time to hand you the reins.
Okay, just tell me when time's up because I've got a few slides here. Okay, so
I'll keep an eye out for any questions I might come across here.
Okay, cool. Okay, so let's go for it.
Let's do it.
So I've basically been through all of the R cameras. So I'll just give you an express tour. I was saying to Sean earlier, I took this image of Sydney Harbour Bridge just hours after Sean gave me a pre-production model. And I had invested in the A7 with the very early phase detect autofocus, but I switched out for resolution, and it was an instant love affair. If you see these images on a big 4K screen, it's amazing how much detail you can actually see in them. There, it's just crazy. It's phenomenal. If you're not already using a 4K screen with your R camera, you certainly need to invest in one so you can appreciate. I was originally attracted to the full frame mirrorless cameras when I was first shown them, pre-production models, because they were exactly the same size as the analog cameras I'd gone through the 1980s and 1990s with. And I couldn't believe that Sony had managed to get a full frame sensor in a body no bigger than Olympus had got a micro 4/3 sensor. And we're talking about 4 times the surface area there. I didn't abandon using DSLR or DSLT, as Sony called them back then, because there was no phase detect autofocus on the original R. So if anything moved, I would be using the Alpha 99, which just happens to be my last camera that featured a mirror. And then things changed. Then we got the R2. And this image I captured, I was actually shooting a landscape over my shoulder, heard the dog, the owner's dog calling the dog. I turned around, switched it to my action settings, and piled off 3 or 4 shots of this Dalmatian running. And I realized I don't need to own mirrored cameras anymore because phase detect autofocus had come of age on the R2. And of course, being an R, it was actually that 4K image was cropped out of this full frame. And that is really the beauty. I know Craig is printing these humongous prints, but for me, it's all about croppability. And I'm going to claim that word. Okay, so we got the other thing that came with the R2 was not just the phase detect autofocus. It was that stabilization. And here I am hand holding. So it's almost I can leave the tripod at home because I'm hand holding a 1/5 of a second, f11, ISO 100, just around sunset. And so I'm getting that depth of field even without a tripod. And of course, the high ISO capability of these cameras was just mind-blowing. You know, I had grown up with Kodachrome 64, and here I am shooting this tree frog at ISO 5000. Now, I do a little bit of post-production work on the noise, but this image would easily go a couple of meters wide and no one would be looking at noise. The other thing that came in with the two was such a landmark camera, was IAF, and I'm big on portraiture. So here I am shooting this beautiful portrait with the 85 1.4 and relying on the IAF to nail every shot, which of course it does. One of the other great advantages of the mirrorless, the what you see is what you get. I could use DMF. This predates animal IAF. So I was using the DMF technique just to push beyond the nose to nail those eyes on an 85mm prime. And then just when I thought things couldn't get better, the 3 arrived. And with the 3, it was all about ergonomics as well as just features that made my life so much easier. For many amateurs, the Z series batteries goes all day. We've got those dual cards. I don't use the second card as an insurance policy or a redundancy slot. I just flow over from one to the other. The important thing about that slot 1 was its speed, because the R3 got a much bigger buffer that allowed me to shoot now birds in flight, grab 30, 40 images in sequence. This was at a MotoGP. I was shooting with the A9, but I needed reach. So I've got yeah.
I'm just going to jump in here. We did get a question from the audience asking whether both of you shoot in compressed or uncompressed RAW, and why.
Okay, so I'm shooting in, whenever I shoot sports, I'm shooting compressed RAW. Whenever I'm shooting landscape, I'm shooting uncompressed. Obviously, shooting in compressed RAW gives me the extra frames per second, and those images are going to write faster to the card. And with things like portraits and sports, you're not aggressively editing those images in post-production like you are with landscapes, perhaps. So compressed RAW is absolutely fine to do with this. So this image, as I was saying, I'm getting the 840mm reach from a 400mm prime. I'm shooting in APS-C mode with a 1.4 teleconverter. There's no way the A9 could get to the other side. I'm actually standing one corner away from the circuit to get these riders coming over the brow of the hill. And as if I didn't mention it before, it's all about croppability. Sometimes if this was pre 600mm. So if you needed to get in, just use the 400, shoot in APS-C mode, or crop in post. One of the advantages of shooting in APS-C mode, of course, is you do increase the number of frames that you can capture in the buffer. So I know you're actually cropping in camera rather than cropping in post, but that does give you slight advantages. Another great thing about these full frame cameras, especially the Rs, is their dynamic range. So this is actually correctly exposed for the highlights and then post-press for the shadows. And this is really showing the strength of the dynamic range. The shadows are so clean that you can underexpose those shadows 2, 3, 4 stops and just bring them up in post. Another thing that improved with the IAF on the Mark III is that you could shoot portraits in profile view. The camera didn't have to see both eyes to recognize it as a face. And of course, with a firmware upgrade on those 3 models, we got animal IAF, which allowed me to push beyond the nose without having to use that DMF technique, which of course just made the whole workflow easier. And of course, high ISO again. Here I am shooting after sunset, 1000 ISO with maximum aperture on that beautiful 135. I don't use tripods very often, and the R cameras really make that possible.
Before we move on to the 4, got another question. Just, have you ever had an SD card failure?
I did. Actually, that's a good timing on that, Sean. I had an SD card failure an hour after I took this shot.
Oh, no way.
I think I ejected the card while it was still writing the files to the card. And I ejected the card for whatever reason. And I think it confused the camera. I didn't write to that card again. I carried on shooting on the second card. And I used a piece of software to recover the files from that card. And I successfully recovered all of the files, including this one, from that card later that evening. It caused me a little bit of a sweat. But if you ever do have a data error, don't follow the directions on the screen. Just eject the card and maybe try and recover those files in post. There's plenty of software around now that can usually recover those files on a card. Okay.
Craig, have you ever had a card go sideways on you?
Oh, sure. I mean, it's happened twice, and it happened. The last time it happened was probably 3 years ago. And I did a really dumb thing. Like I put the card in, it said not reading card. So I licked the card. So I thought, hang on, if I lick it, then I'm going to clean it. And then I put it back. And it just shorted the whole thing out, and I lost everything.
I'll try to remember never to lick my
licking card, all right?
Thanks for that top tip, Craig.
Yeah,
no worries. And don't lick the sensor either. Okay?
Yeah.
Okay, right.
Pearls of wisdom here tonight.
Okay, pearls of wisdom. Yeah. Okay.
All right.
So the great thing with the 4, of course, it acquired the AF tracking. So gone is the lock-on AF. And the reason that the tracking is so much more reliable now is they added an additional algorithm, which is texture. And that texture just means that it can spot the difference between hair on a dog and green grass. And it just helps for the camera to stay on your subject twice as often, basically. And that is absolutely fabulous. And what I'm doing here is I'm showcasing the camera using the 135 f1.8. It might look like a portrait lens. I use it for portrait, but it's got the dual linear XD motors from the 400 and 600 mil sports primes. So this lens moves like the clappers. And certainly if you got your subject close enough, and I know Craig loves it as well, then you can use it as an action. So I shoot my portraits, I shoot my action, I shoot my landscapes. Really, these R cameras are a camera for all reasons, really. And I just want to point out that they raise the resolution. And typically when you raise resolution, things like dynamic range should go down. But with the Sony R sensors, they never have. The dynamic range always goes up. So this is one image from a 5-image bracket. It's probably underexposed by 3 stops, so I can just hold on to that sky. I actually merged the 5 images to create a HDR, and then just to look, I actually just processed the 3-stop under, and it was absolutely better than the HDR 5-shot merger. And so I've actually stopped bracketing on this A7R4 camera.
So have I.
So, yeah. So we look at resolution, because some people will say you don't need that much resolution. I love the resolution. Here's a 4K crop from a vertical. So that would fill your 70-inch Sony Bravia TV just from that portion of the 61 megapixel sensor. And when we zoom in, just like Craig's elephant shot, you just go, crikey, there's a whole galaxy in the eye of this lemur. And let's just go back a shot. So there's a 24 megapixel vertical from a 61 megapixel horizontal. If you're a commercial photographer and the client changes their mind, do clients ever change their mind? Then you've got that flexibility just to say, sure, no problem. I actually shot these when I was reviewing the A7R4 just a day or two after I got the camera. And there's a 1:1 crop. And this is really where you just go, crikey, I know why I'm investing in resolution here now. These were 16:9 verticals that Sony Singapore requested, but you could easily take out a 4K horizontal close portrait crop from these. So, you can just shoot wide, crop later. This was actually shot in APS-C mode, and I can show you that you've still got huge amounts of croppability even when you're shooting in APS-C mode, which is 26 megapixels. And so just to show you, I could actually shoot a MotoGP on the A7R4 using an APS-C lens with 26 megapixels. Isn't that crazy? Because this, like Sony APS-C lens, has an equivalent reach of 525. Okay, so for anybody who's wanting to get to grips with their R3 or R4, if you go to my website, you can pull off a 400-page ebook for your A7R3 or your A7R4 camera. And if you're really new to these cameras, you can watch many of my movies on the Alpha Creative Skills channel. I've got like 100 of these movies. And you could even have me as a mentor by joining me on Patreon. And without much more of a share now, I'll stop sharing. Sean, can you stop sharing? I've lost my mouse.
I can pop you down there. There we go.
I've got no mouse.
We actually got a question from the audience. Thanks, Mark, by the way. That was a very enlightening little presentation there. Rafael Serrano asks, do you guys use teleconverters on the 200 to 600 or 100 to 400? Good question.
Mark, yeah.
Okay, yes. If you're running with the R3, you can't really use the 2x converter and have full-time phase detect autofocus in continuous medium, continuous high mode. The focus will get locked onto the first shot in the sequence and not move there. So you're sort of restricted to the 1.4 times teleconverter on the 100-400 and no teleconverters on the 200-600. Whereas on the A7R4, you can actually use those teleconverters because they move the minimum aperture that you can use with phase detect autofocus out to f11. So that was a great question, actually. Some people do get caught out on the R3s using 2x teleconverters and wonder why their sequences aren't sharp.
Yeah, it's been really interesting working with some sports pros who've been, checking out the Alpha system recently. And, they'll be used to DSLRs where once you go past, usually f8, in some cases f11, with your teleconverters, that's it. Autofocus is gone. And so they often just can't even use them. They can only use teles with the big primes because that's the only way you can get enough light through them to actually autofocus. But yeah, with the 100 to 400 or the 200 and 600 on most of our cameras, you can go up to f11 on the newer ones, and in some cases you can go way past that as well. Definitely it makes the teleconverters just way more useful in a lot of situations.
I didn't realize how useful those the phase detect autofocus in very small apertures was until I shot the MotoGP, and I'm trying to slow the shutter speed down to 1/320th of a second to get some subject blur behind the motorcycles, except it was a really sunny day on Phillip Island, and I realized I was sort of limited to 1/500th until the firmware upgrade came along for the A9 cameras, and I realized now I could stop my lens down some more.
You didn't bring your 82mm ND with you?
There is a little filter drawer at the back of those, and I realized why, because those filter sizes are absolutely immense.
They're huge. They're really huge. Yeah, actually, they just takes a standard 42.5mm filter, so you can just
a lot cheaper than the the big alternative.
Yeah, that's right. Just see, I think we might have a few more questions in here. A lot of comments about your SD card leaking behavior there, Craig.
Oh, really? Wow.
You made quite an impression.
Even professionals make mistakes.
That's when I'm gonna have some legs.
Guys, come on.
Let's see. We did have a question just about shooting macro and action. We're just sort of waiting for a bit of clarification on this one, but maybe we'll sort of have a bit of a bat around with macro and action settings in general. Do you guys, I don't suppose either of you guys shoot a heap of macro, do you, generally speaking?
Yeah, look, one of the things that I started doing, I did own the 90mm macro lens, but I wasn't getting much of a workout, because what I realized I was doing, I was using the 100-400 and just getting within 1 meter of my subject. And when you're 1 meter from your subject with a 400mm focal length, that tree frog was a prime example that I showed you. That tree frog filled the frame. I often don't shoot wildlife much smaller than that tree frog, so I don't tend to shoot insects. So if I was shooting more mushrooms and insects, maybe I'd be giving that 90mm macro a bit more of a workout.
Yeah. I guess just to give, some general tips for macro, I think macro is one of the hardest types of photography. I think as your magnification goes up, either you're shooting way out at the telephoto end or you're shooting really up close with your subject, everything gets harder. Your shutter speed has to be faster, or you have to have better stabilization. You just need to be worried a lot more about there are so many more technical things that you can do wrong that will just ruin your sharpness.
Yeah, aperture needs to be above 9 or 10. If you're that close, then you've got to have apertures at 14, and so you need a lot of light on the subject. So those sort of ring flashes, or I remember speaking to one of the ambassadors from Sony that does a lot of the fungi. What's his name?
Steve.
Steve Axford. Yeah.
Yeah. Geez, that's what we need to do.
He lives around the bloody corner from you as well. I should have got him on.
He does. He could have come to the gallery for the night. So.
I've got another question from the chat here asking, do the extra megapixels matter?
Yeah.
Well, yeah.
Asking a very biased audience here.
Yeah. Look,
I mean,
yeah.
Here you go, Mark. Here you go. Yeah.
I was just going to say, look, there's a lot of people with 24 megapixel cameras who talk themselves out of owning an R. But once bitten, you're not going back, really. I do use the 24 megapixel A9 cameras for fast autofocus, but if dynamic range and resolution is important, then it's got to be the R, really. It's and as I said, I sit very close to my 27-inch 4K screen, and it just brings a smile to my face every time I fill the screen with one of those R images.
Mm.
I mean, yeah, sorry.
No, you go.
Yeah, I mean, the lower megapixel cameras do serve a purpose in my workflow. If I'm shooting editorial work, if I'm shooting documentaries, which don't require to have the resolution, then I'll jump on the A9 Mark II, and that enables me also to shoot if I'm on documentary or on set. Then I can shoot silent mode, and that's a big thing, especially when I'm on production. So, but whenever I have a gallery photo in mind, which is 90% of the time, resolution is always my first priority.
Just we did get a bit of a clarification on that question before. It was just about creative styles, which is an interesting one because I think we often, because I'm sure both of you shoot RAW 90+ % of the time, probably don't think a great deal about the creative styles. I guess just to clarify a little bit, creative styles don't affect RAW files, so they're only going to turn up in your JPEGs. Yeah, in terms of the original question was, what creative style would you recommend for macro versus sports action, that sort of thing. And generally speaking, it absolutely does come down to taste. I think a lot of the time, vivid is a popular setting just because it gives your images punch. At least they're not going to be flat and boring. It'll make them really give them some kick. But on the whole, what you need to be doing if you are shooting in JPEG and you want to use those creative styles to give your JPEGs out of camera a little bit more of a look, is just scroll through them and have a bit of a play with them and see what works for you, and for that particular subject as well. I don't know if you guys have any other thoughts there.
Yeah, I just about an hour and a half ago, I finished making a movie on the creative styles. It isn't live yet, but it was talking about how you can affect color on the camera, talking about Adobe RGB, sRGB, creative styles, and white balance. And interestingly, I did say that I don't tend to use creative styles much at all, really, because I am a raw shooter and they don't actually affect the raw files. But I did point out that when I sometimes know I'm shooting for a black and white sequence, like in the sand dunes, or I was in Japan shooting a couple of black and white editorial pieces, I actually switch over to the black and white creative style mode, because color can be a little bit of a distraction to composing in black and white. Switching the creative style to black and white just forces you just to see light and shade, and therefore remove color from the equation. So, it can be quite useful.
Yeah, I think that's a great piece of advice. I remember when the NEXs first came out, which were our sort of first mirrorless cameras, and I loved having those black and white creative styles because because I was a relatively novice photographer at the time, and still I don't know if I could really see in black and white the way that I see a lot of real pros do, or just people who are experienced shooting in black and white. They're able to kind of mentally subtract the color, but for me, I couldn't get past it. And being able to see on the camera in black and white was like such a brilliant crutch. Like it actually made a huge difference.
Yeah.
I mean, I with profiles, I generally shoot neutral because I'm using a lot of my images are underwater, obviously, or a lot of color. So I like to see a neutral sort of a view of the image. And geez, what else? I mean, it'd be neutral, and I mean, the most important thing for me, I'm still shooting raw, but to have the ability to look at to refer to the screen straight away and make sure my white balance is right. It doesn't matter if I can adjust it in Photoshop or not. It's still nice to have a good reference on white balance. So when I'm underwater, I generally shoot. Oh, there goes my lights in the gallery.
You weren't moving around enough.
My gallery in the corner.
Maybe you should sort out your lights and we'll film, mate.
Yeah, no, it's on timer. So it's like, yeah. So
we know we're live then.
So underwater, I'll shoot say cloudy. White balance. That gives me a general sort of indication of what the color is going to look like. Let me just turn these lights back on. Hang on a second, guys.
I could add to what Craig was saying there. Was one of the other things that I often get commented on is sometimes the shadows always look much darker when somebody opens their RAW file in a RAW editing program like Lightroom or Capture One. And that's usually because the dynamic range optimizer, which is on by default in the cameras, which serves to lighten the shadows, doesn't migrate to the RAW file. But all you have to do is just move the shadow slider to your right, and that is basically dynamic range optimizer in post. So don't worry about that. The exposure looks different in your RAW editing suite to what it did on the camera. That is normal. And if it freaks you out, just switch the dynamic range optimizer off. I actually quite like it because if I'm shooting landscapes, backlit landscapes, you can't actually see the foreground. You can see them with your eyes, but in the camera, they just look like silhouettes. So that does skew the way you compose your shot if you don't have dynamic range optimizer on in the camera.
Yeah, I like to shoot with it off just because I feel like it gives me a better sense of what I'm going to see when I open things up. But yeah. Got a question here from Arathorn 1968 saying he's using the A65 with the 18-105 and enjoys it, but when he puts the lens onto his R Mark II, the focus seems a bit slower than the 6500. Asking if we have any comments on that. I suppose, like off the top of my head, I would say, the 6500 is using a different sensor, and it is a camera which is designed for APS-C primarily. And although there are, look, I'm going to have to, I believe off the top of my head, there are more focus points on the R Mark II than the 6500. I'm stabbing there a little bit.
Yeah.
That's a reach. That's a reach. But they're going to be all across, just the APS-C section of the 6500 sensor, where the R Mark II is going to be a little bit more spread and may not make use of all of those sensors with the APS-C lens on it. Yeah, look, it is tough. It's very hard. Obviously, we're just basing this on a vague, like, inevitably this is going to be like a little vague because it's kind of a vague question. But yeah, look, moving between different cameras from 6500 R Mark II are not wildly different generations. If you're talking about a 6600, then it'd be, of course, like newer hardware, newer software, blah, blah, blah. But in this case, I'd sort of say, look, there are a few things that might result in that being a little bit different. But you shouldn't be seeing a night and day difference there, generally speaking, is what I'd expect.
Probably need to point out, I'm not too sure whether they're aware, but of course, using an APS-C lens on a full frame camera, the megapixel count is going to drop from 42 to 18. And the 18105 is a slightly older lens now. It is cracking on a bit. Certainly some of the newer lenses, such as the 70 to 350, they put a linear motor in there, and that certainly kicks its heels and gets up and moves to the point where you're going to track birds in flight. So I don't know whether I'd be tracking birds in flight with an 18105. Well, it's a bit too short, but also it is getting a little bit older now.
Just seeing if we've got any other questions that we can address here. I think let's have a little scroll here. There is a question about the recent price increase. It's not really my area to talk about that. So I don't want to, I can't give you like a really solid answer there. I mean, ultimately, definitely the exchange rate has a contributing factor there. I'm sure COVID's impacted that, but question was just, is it due to COVID-19? And the answer is, yeah, probably a factor, but not the only thing that's bearing on that. But again, like it's many things that bear on that. Yeah. Apart from uncompressed RAW and compressed RAW, do we think Sony will move to various RAW sizes? Unfortunately, this is one of those areas where we just can't comment because it's about what will we do in the future, and we just can't pass comment on that stuff. I can tell you that Mark and Craig don't know.
Yes, I don't know.
Yeah, we do.
And I also I know that for a fact, and I don't know either, as it happens. Yeah, look, it's certainly something that has been requested of Sony, and that's stuff that we do feed back. So, we're always listening, and we do feed back those sort of questions and requests back up the chain to, head office and ultimately to the engineers. But, there's, we just can't comment on it.
Yeah, my workaround for that, Sean, at the moment, look, I wouldn't, I'd quite like to see a small RAW, certainly on the R cameras, but my workaround is just to shoot in APS-C mode. That's it, really. And APS-C mode on the A7R4 is 26 megapixels, which is very respectable. And I've got the lenses, so I know I'm going to have a narrower field of view once I shoot in APS-C mode, but I've got some very wide lenses, so I can basically allow for that. So,
yeah, great. Well, look, gentlemen, I think we've gone through a lot here tonight. I hope people have found the stream useful. Thank you both for your time on stream. It's been a pleasure. Any last thoughts on the R series cameras?
I did see one comment coming in through, say the broadcast is 720p, and we're talking about the beauty of resolution. I just point out that I'm sure the same with Craig is Sony people can head over to my Flickr site, and I upload everything at either 4K or full resolution. So if you've got a big 30-inch 4K monitor, you should be able to see some of the images we were showcasing tonight in 4K.
If you want to see Craig's images in full resolution, just go to Byron Bay.
Yeah, walk into his gallery. And buy one.
Thanks Camera House and Sony Australia. It's been a great evening. It's good to have these online sort of live chats and get people interacting with people, professionals like Mark and Sean. For me, at the moment, standstill is workshops. But it's been exciting because it's been able to sort of explore more places in Australia that I could take people around and photograph as well. So sooner or later, it won't be too much longer. I'll be releasing dates and those sort of things for workshops around Australia, and hopefully next year international workshops will open up again and back on our feet and shooting.
Brilliant. All right, guys. Well, we'll leave you there. Thanks very much for tuning in. Have a great night. And thanks again to Camera House for being our host tonight.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
Hooray.
Brilliant.